The small town of Emporium lay quiet that afternoon, with the wind brushing over the dusty road and a faint smell of rain hanging in the air. At the edge of town sat a lonely bus stop where a little girl named Emily waited, her legs swinging off the wooden bench. She was only 8, wearing a faded pink dress and holding a small cloth bag that seemed too light to carry anything important. The strap of her old backpack was torn, and one shoe had a missing buckle. Her hair was messy, and her eyes looked tired from crying for hours. Cars passed once in a while, their drivers glancing her way but not stopping. The town had seen many things: stray dogs, wandering workers, even lost travelers. But a small child sitting alone was something that made people uncomfortable. Most thought someone else will ask and kept driving. The evening sun lowered behind the grain silos, throwing long shadows on the road. Emily's stomach growled quietly, but she tried to stay still. Her stepmother's last words still echoed in her ears, cold, sharp words that told her she didn't belong anymore. Emily tried to remember her father's face. He had been gentle, always smelling of soap and hay. He used to lift her high in the air, laughing when she giggled. But after he passed away, everything changed. Her stepmother had seemed kind at first, promising to look after her. But soon little things went wrong. Emily's toys disappeared, her meals got smaller, her chores got longer. The smiles turned to sighs and finally to anger. When Emily accidentally broke a small vase that morning, the woman's patience ended. She packed the girl's small bag, placed it by the door, and said words Emily never thought she would hear. Now she sat under the fading light, unsure where to go. Her tiny fingers clutched an old teddy bear, its ear half torn. It was the only thing left from her father. She whispered to it, "Daddy said you'll keep me safe." The bear, of course, said nothing back, but the comfort of holding it made the ache in her heart a little smaller. A cool wind brushed through her hair, and she pulled her knees close to her chest. Down the road, a few people at the diner could see her through the window. The cook, an older man with gray hair, frowned and wiped his hands on his apron. "That little girl's been sitting there since noon," he said to the waitress. "Ain't right." The waitress peeked through the glass, then shrugged. "Maybe her folks will come. Let's give it a bit." It was the kind of answer people gave when they didn't know what else to do. Time passed. The daylight began to fade into orange and purple. Emily rubbed her eyes and watched the sky. She didn't know how to read a clock, but she could tell it was getting late. A group of sparrows flew over the road, and for a moment she forgot about being scared. She imagined her father watching from the sky, smiling at her. "I'm brave, Daddy," she whispered softly. "I didn't cry much." A truck rumbled by, lifting dust that made her cough. When it disappeared around the curve, everything fell silent again except for the distant sound of a windmill turning. Her stomach hurt from hunger and her throat was dry. She thought about going into the diner, but she had no money, and she was afraid they'd ask questions. She was just a little girl with nowhere to go, and that truth sat heavy in her chest. Across the street, an old man came out of the hardware store carrying a box. He looked at Emily and paused. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked kindly. Emily looked down and shook her head. She didn't want to talk. The man waited a moment, then sighed and went on his way. The town wasn't unkind. It was just quiet, and people had their own troubles. As night approached, the lights of the diner flickered on, and a small sign buzzed softly in the wind. Emily lay her head against her bag and tried to close her eyes. The bench was hard, but she was too tired to care. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked, and she hugged her teddy bear tighter. Far away, the sound of a horse's hooves came faintly through the air, slow and steady. A man named Jack Turner was riding back to his ranch after a long day at the cattle auction. He was a tall man with kind eyes hidden beneath a dusty hat. The auction hadn't gone well. He'd sold only half of what he wanted, and the road home felt longer than usual. But Jack was used to long rides and quiet nights. Since his wife and son had passed years ago, he had learned to live with silence. When he reached the diner, he decided to stop for a cup of coffee. His horse, Dusty, snorted softly as he tied the reins to the post. Jack stepped inside, nodding to the cook. "Evening, Charlie," he said. The cook greeted him back and poured coffee into a chipped mug. "You just missed the rain," Charlie said. "Sky's holding it for tomorrow." Jack nodded, too tired to talk. As he sipped the coffee, something outside caught his eye. A small figure sitting on the bench by the bus stop, barely moving. Jack squinted. The figure was tiny, and the yellow light from the lamppost barely reached her face. He frowned and set down his mug. "Who's that outside?" he asked quietly. The waitress glanced up. Oh, that girl's been there since noon. Poor thing looks tired, but she won't talk to anyone. Jack turned toward the window again. His chest tightened. There was something about the way she sat, curled up like she was trying to disappear. He thought of his own son when he was small, sitting by the barn door waiting for him to finish chores. The memory hit hard. Jack stood up, pushed his hat down, and walked out. The wind had turned cool and the lamplight flickered as he approached. Emily didn't notice him at first. She was humming quietly to her teddy bear, a soft tune her father used to sing. Jack stopped a few feet away and spoke gently. Hey there, little one. You lost? Emily jumped a little and looked up. Her eyes were wide and shiny and her voice came out small. No, sir, she whispered. I'm just waiting. Waiting for who? He asked kindly. She hesitated. I don't know, she said after a pause. Maybe Daddy. Jack's throat felt tight. He took off his hat and rubbed the back of his neck. You been out here long? She nodded. Since the sun was up. Jack crouched down so he could meet her eyes. You got anyone to go home to? Emily didn't answer. She looked at the ground and hugged her bear close. That was all the answer he needed. He looked at her small hands, her thin arms, the dirt on her dress. The way she trembled told him she hadn't eaten. Jack sighed softly. Tell you what, he said in a calm voice. How about you come inside for a bit? It's warm in there and maybe we can find you something to eat. Emily's eyes filled with doubt. I don't got money, she whispered quickly. Jack smiled faintly. Don't need any. I'll take care of it. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. He held out his hand and she looked at it like it was something fragile. Finally, she stood and placed her tiny hand in his. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was gentle. When they entered the diner, everyone fell quiet for a moment. The waitress gave a small smile and the cook nodded approvingly. Jack guided Emily to a booth near the window and sat across from her. She looked around, nervous but curious. He ordered her a bowl of soup and a glass of milk. When the food arrived, she stared at it for a second before picking up the spoon. She ate slowly at first, as if afraid someone might take it away. Jack pretended not to notice and just sipped his coffee. But inside he felt something stir. A strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. When she finished, she wiped her mouth shyly with a napkin. Thank you, sir, she said in a whisper. Jack nodded. You're welcome, sweetheart. She smiled faintly, and for a second her eyes looked almost bright again. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and steady, tapping against the window. Jack looked at the dark road stretching toward the hills. He couldn't just leave her there. Not tonight. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. No child should face a storm alone. And as thunder rumbled far away, he made a quiet promise to himself, though he didn't say it aloud. He would get her out of the cold, even if it was only for one night. What he didn't know was that this small decision, made under the hum of a diner's neon light, was about to change both their lives forever. The rain outside had grown heavier, beating softly against the diner's windows as Jack and Emily sat in silence. The warm smell of coffee and fried bread filled the air. Emily sat on the edge of the booth, small hands wrapped around the glass of milk she hadn't finished yet. Her eyes followed the raindrops racing down the glass, but her thoughts were far away. Jack watched her quietly. There was something about the stillness in her face that told him this little girl had seen more sadness than any child should. When the clock on the wall struck 9, the diner began to empty. The cook flipped the sign to closed and started cleaning the counter. Jack stood and stretched, then turned toward the small figure sitting across from him. You got any place to stay tonight, kiddo? He asked softly. Emily shook her head. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't think so. Jack rubbed his chin, thinking. He could leave her with the sheriff, but it was late and raining hard. He could take her to the town shelter, but it was crowded and rough. He looked at her again, wet shoes, tired eyes, and that worn-out teddy bear. He sighed quietly. Well, he said, it's a long ride to my ranch, but I reckon I've got an extra blanket in the barn. You'll be warmer there than sitting at this stop? Emily blinked, unsure if she heard right. Barn? She asked softly. Jack nodded with a faint smile. Got a good roof, dry hay, and a dog named Duke who won't mind sharing. For the first time all night, Emily gave a tiny smile, one that came and went so quickly it almost broke his heart. Can I really? She asked shyly. Sure can, Jack said. but only if you promise not to run off into the rain." "I won't," she said quickly. Jack paid the bill, thanked the cook, and led Emily outside. The rain had softened into a fine drizzle. He untied his horse, Dusty, and pulled his old coat off the saddle. "Here," he said, wrapping it around her shoulders. "It's big, but warm." Emily hugged the coat close and looked up at the tall horse beside her. "He's huge," she whispered. Jack chuckled. "Don't worry, Dusty's a gentleman. Hop up. I'll help you." He lifted her gently onto the saddle, then climbed up behind her. She sat stiff at first, unsure what to do. "Hold on to the horn there," he said, pointing. "You'll be fine." As they rode out of town, the lights faded behind them, and the sound of rain mixed with the steady rhythm of hooves. Emily's eyes grew heavy as the road stretched long and dark. She leaned back slightly, and Jack felt her small head rest against his arm. He didn't say anything, just rode slow, making sure the horse stayed steady. The land around them opened wide, rolling hills hidden beneath the mist. After about half an hour, the faint glow of a lantern appeared in the distance. "That's home," Jack said quietly. Emily lifted her head, eyes half closed. The ranch looked peaceful. Old wooden fences, a small stable, and a two-room house standing against the open sky. Jack stopped near the barn and helped her down. Duke, his old brown dog, ran out wagging his tail, barking softly. "Easy there, Duke," Jack said, patting his head. "We got company tonight." Emily smiled a little and crouched down. The dog sniffed her hand, then licked it. She giggled quietly, the first sound of joy he'd heard from her. "He's friendly," she said. "Too friendly," Jack replied with a chuckle. "Come on, let's get you settled." Inside the barn, it smelled of hay and wood smoke. Jack spread out a thick blanket on a pile of clean straw and handed her another one to cover up with. "Ain't fancy, but it'll do," he said kindly. Emily nodded, still holding the teddy bear close. "Thank you, mister." Jack smiled faintly. "Name's Jack." "Thank you, Mr. Jack," she said softly. He lit a small lantern and set it near her so she wouldn't be scared of the dark. "You get some rest now. I'll be in the house if you need anything." Emily lay down, curling beneath the blanket. The dog lay beside her, warm and calm. Jack stood for a moment, watching her breathe slowly. Something tugged at his heart, the same feeling he used to get when he checked on his own boy at night. He turned off the lantern and stepped outside, whispering to himself, "Just for tonight." Inside his small house, Jack sat by the window, unable to sleep. The sound of rain on the roof carried memories he hadn't visited in years. He thought about the storm that took his wife and son away, about how quiet his life had become since then. The ranch was his world now, just him, his animals, and long days of work. But tonight there was a little girl sleeping in his barn, and for the first time in years he didn't feel completely alone. At dawn, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale blue and the air smelled fresh. Jack stepped outside and walked to the barn. He heard giggles inside. When he opened the door, he found Emily sitting on the floor, feeding Duke bits of bread from her small bag. "Mornin', partner," Jack said with a smile. Emily looked up quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Jack," she said. "He's hungry. Looks like you made a friend," Jack replied. He poured some oats for the horse and handed Emily a small bowl of milk. "Here, you better eat too." She nodded and drank quietly, watching him work. He moved around the barn with steady hands, checking tools, feeding the animals. After a few minutes, she asked softly, "Do you live here all alone?" Jack paused, then nodded. "Been that way for a while. Don't you get lonely?" she asked, tilting her head. He gave a small smile. "Sometimes," he said, "but it's quiet, and I like the quiet." Emily hugged her teddy bear. "I don't like quiet," she whispered. "It feels like no one's there." Jack didn't know what to say. The truth in her words hit deep. He knelt beside her and said gently, "Well, Duke's here now and Dusty too, and you're here for breakfast, so not too quiet this morning, huh?" She smiled shyly and nodded. After breakfast, Jack walked her to the fence, showing her the horses. "That one's Daisy," he said. "She's stubborn but gentle." Emily stretched her hand to touch the mare's nose, giggling when the horse snorted softly. "She likes me." "Guess she does," Jack said with a grin. "You got away with animals." "I used to have a cat," she said quietly. Before I left." Jack noticed the way her voice trailed off, the sadness hidden behind her smile. He didn't ask what had happened. Some stories were too heavy to tell right away. When the sun climbed higher, Emily helped him carry a bucket of feed to the chicken coop. She stumbled once and Jack caught the bucket before it tipped. "Easy there, cowgirl," he said with a laugh. She looked up, smiling. "Cowgirl?" "Sure," he said. "You're on a ranch now. Everyone's a cowboy or a cowgirl here." Her laugh was small but bright. It echoed in the quiet yard, and Jack felt something warm rise inside him again. As the day went on, he found himself teaching her little things: how to brush the horses, how to collect eggs without cracking them. She listened carefully, asking questions in her small, curious voice. Each answer he gave made her smile a little more. By the time the sun began to set, the ranch felt different. There was laughter again, footsteps running in the yard, and a child's voice calling Duke's name. Jack stood by the porch watching her chase the dog near the fence and couldn't help but smile. It had been years since anyone called his name with joy. When evening came, he made her soup and bread in the kitchen. She sat at the table, legs swinging. "It's nice here," she said softly. "Feel safe," Jack nodded, his voice low. "You're welcome to stay tonight again till we figure things out." Emily looked down at her bowl, thinking for a long time before whispering, "Thank you, Mr. Jack." Outside, the stars began to shine. The field stretched quiet under the moonlight. Inside the barn, Duke curled up near Emily's blanket again. She whispered to her teddy bear before sleeping, "Daddy would like it here." Jack stood in the doorway for a while, watching her breathe peacefully. He didn't know what the future would bring or how long she'd stay, but something deep in his heart told him this was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected. The next morning began with the sound of birds and the smell of breakfast. Sunlight touched the edges of the barn, turning the hay into soft gold. Emily opened her eyes slowly and saw Duke sleeping beside her, his tail thumping when he noticed she was awake. She giggled and petted his head. For the first time in many days, she felt safe. The fear that had followed her since leaving home was fading a little, like a dark cloud drifting away. Jack was already outside, pouring feed for the horses. When he heard the barn door creak, he turned and smiled. "Mornin', sunshine. Sleep all right?" Emily nodded shyly, rubbing her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Jack, the hay's soft." "That's good to hear," he said. "Come on, breakfast's ready. Hope you like pancakes." Her face brightened and she hurried after him, Duke following close behind. Inside the small house, the table was simple: 2 plates, 1 cup of coffee, and 1 glass of milk. Emily climbed onto a chair and watched steam rise from her pancakes. She waited until Jack nodded before taking a bite. It tasted warm and sweet, and her eyes sparkled. "These are better than the diner's pancakes," she said with a little smile. Jack laughed softly. "Well, that's a mighty compliment." They ate quietly for a while. Jack wasn't used to company at breakfast, and Emily wasn't used to being spoken to kindly. But it didn't feel strange. It felt calm, like the world was finally breathing slower. After breakfast, Jack cleaned the dishes while Emily looked around the house. There were pictures on the wall, one of a young woman in a blue dress and another of a boy about her age standing beside a pony. She stared at them curiously. "Who's that?" she asked softly. Jack paused, turning slightly. His eyes rested on the photos. "That was my wife, Sarah," he said after a moment. "And that's my son, Luke. Where are they now?" she asked. Jack took a slow breath and answered gently, "They're in heaven now." Emily went quiet. She didn't ask anything more, but her little heart felt something heavy for him. She knew what it felt like to miss someone. After a few seconds, she whispered, "They looked nice." "They were," Jack said with a small, distant smile. The air grew quiet for a while until Duke barked from outside. Emily turned to the door. "Can I go play with him?" "Of course," Jack said, forcing a smile. "Just stay near the house." Emily ran out into the yard, laughing as the dog chased her in circles. Jack watched from the porch. Her laughter filled the open space, and it sounded like music to his ears. It had been years since this ranch had heard laughter. He leaned on the railing, taking in the sight of a child running freely again. It stirred something deep inside him, something that had been asleep for a long time. As the day warmed, Emily followed Jack around the ranch. She watched him fix a fence, brush the horses, and gather eggs. She tried to help, though her hands were small and clumsy. When she dropped a bucket of water by accident, she looked up nervously, expecting to be scolded. But Jack only smiled. "That's all right," he said kindly. "Spill happens. Try again." Her eyes widened in surprise, then she smiled and tried again. Careful this time. Jack noticed how she tried so hard to please, as if every mistake might make her unwanted again. He didn't say anything, but in his heart, he promised himself he'd never make her feel that way here. By afternoon, the two of them were sitting under the shade of an old oak tree near the fence line. Jack was sharpening a tool while Emily braided a few strands of hay into little rings. "What are you making there?" he asked. "A bracelet," she said proudly. "For you, so you don't forget me." Jack looked at her, surprised. "Forget you? Don't think that's possible, kiddo." She smiled shyly and handed him the tiny hay bracelet. He slipped it over his wrist, pretending to inspect it like a fine piece of jewelry. "Looks perfect," he said. "You might be a rancher's helper after all." She giggled, and for a moment everything felt light. Later that evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, Jack built a small fire pit near the porch. Emily sat beside him, roasting a piece of bread on a stick. Duke lay at their feet, half asleep. "Do you always live alone like this?" she asked suddenly. Jack nodded slowly. "Been that way for a few years now." "Don't you get lonely?" He looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "But the ranch keeps me busy. And I got Duke. Guess that helps." Emily poked the fire gently. "I get lonely too," she said in a small voice. "When my daddy was here, he used to sing me songs. But after he went away, the house got quiet. My stepmother said I talked too much. I tried to be good, but she still got mad." Jack's heart sank. He could hear the sadness hidden between her simple words. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and said softly, "You're not too much, Emily. You're just fine the way you are." Her eyes filled a little, but she smiled. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said firmly. They sat together until the stars came out. Emily leaned her head on his arm, tired but peaceful. Jack didn't move for a long time. It felt natural, like a part of his heart that had gone quiet was waking up again. When bedtime came, Emily went to the barn as usual. She didn't ask why she couldn't stay in the house. She understood that Jack wasn't used to anyone being there. But before lying down, she looked at him and said softly, "Good night, Mr. Jack." "Good night, Emily," he replied, tipping his hat with a smile. That night, Jack couldn't sleep again. He sat by the window, staring out at the barn where the lantern still glowed faintly. He knew she couldn't stay forever, but he didn't know what would happen next. The thought of her leaving brought a strange ache to his chest. The next morning, Emily surprised him. She was up early, already sweeping the porch with an old broom. "You don't have to do that," Jack said, walking up with his coffee. "I want to," she said. "You helped me. I can help you back," he smiled. Fair enough. Over the next few days, the ranch changed. The air felt lighter, the silence not so heavy. Emily's laughter mixed with the sound of the wind. Jack noticed that Duke followed her everywhere, and even the horses seemed calmer when she was around. But as peaceful as it was, Jack knew it couldn't last forever. The world didn't work that simply. One afternoon, as he was fixing the gate, he saw a car pull up near the fence. It was the town's social worker, Mrs. Reynolds, a kind woman with gray hair and round glasses. She waved at him. "Afternoon, Jack," she called out. "Mind if I come by?" Jack nodded, wiping his hands. "Sure thing, ma'am. What brings you out here?" She smiled gently. "Just checking in. Sheriff said he heard about a little girl staying here. Thought I'd come see how she's doing." Jack's heart sank slightly. He glanced toward the barn where Emily was brushing the horse. "She's fine," he said carefully. "She's safe." Mrs. Reynolds nodded, watching Emily with a kind smile. "I can see that. She looks happier than I've ever seen her." Emily noticed the woman and waved politely. "Hello," she said softly. "Hello, sweetheart," Mrs. Reynolds replied warmly. "You must be Emily." The girl nodded. "Mr. Jack let me stay here." "He makes pancakes," Jack chuckled nervously. "Guess my cooking's famous now." Mrs. Reynolds smiled again. "You've done a good thing, Jack, but we'll need to talk about what's next for her." Jack nodded slowly, though his heart grew heavy. He knew she was right. There were rules about these things. But as he looked toward Emily, who was now laughing as Duke ran in circles around her, he couldn't imagine sending her away. Not now, not after seeing her smile again. When Mrs. Reynolds left, Jack stood by the fence long after her car disappeared down the road. The evening wind brushed through the tall grass, carrying the faint sound of Emily's laughter. He looked toward the barn and whispered, "We'll figure something out, kiddo. I promise." Inside the barn, Emily hummed softly while tucking her teddy bear under the blanket. She didn't know what the grown-ups had talked about, but she could feel something changing in the air. Still, when Jack peeked in to say goodnight, she smiled up at him and said, "Good night, Daddy Jack." He froze for a moment, surprised by the name. Then slowly, a small smile spread across his face. "Good night, little cowgirl," he said gently. Outside, the stars stretched wide above the quiet ranch. Neither of them knew it yet, but that small word, Daddy, had just tied their hearts together in a way that would change both of their lives forever. The next few mornings at the ranch felt like the beginning of a new life for Emily. She woke up before sunrise, brushing her hair with her small fingers and helping Jack feed the animals. She had learned how to carry the egg basket carefully, how to pat the horses without making them nervous, and how to whistle softly to call Duke. The ranch, which had been quiet and lonely for so many years, now felt alive again. Jack noticed it too. He couldn't deny that her laughter, her energy, and her gentle heart had brought light back into his home. But deep inside, he knew there was something coming. The visit from Mrs. Reynolds, the social worker, stayed in his mind. He had tried not to think about it, but it always returned when he saw Emily smiling, or when she called him Daddy Jack. He wanted her to stay. But he also knew that life wasn't always that simple. One morning, as Emily was brushing Duke's fur, she looked up at Jack and said, "Mr. Jack, if I help more, can I stay forever?" Her question caught him by surprise. He looked at her small face, so hopeful and serious. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, looking down. "I just don't want to go nowhere else. It feels nice here." "You don't shout. You smile. Even Duke smiles." Jack knelt beside her, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "You make this place better, Emily. You've got a good heart." "Then can I stay?" she asked again, eyes wide with hope. Jack smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "I'll do my best to make sure you can." She nodded, trusting his words completely. Later that afternoon, Jack decided to take her into town. Her shoes were worn and her dress had started to tear at the seams. He figured she deserved something decent to wear. They rode into town together, with Emily sitting in front of him on the horse, holding onto the saddle horn. She waved at people they passed, and a few townsfolk smiled, surprised to see Jack Turner with a child. He had been known as a quiet man, someone who kept to himself. But now, the sight of a little girl riding beside him softened how people looked at him. They stopped by the general store. Emily's eyes lit up as soon as she saw the rows of dresses hanging in the window, pink, blue, and yellow ones with ribbons and lace. Jack dismounted and helped her down. "Pick whichever one you like," he said. Her mouth opened in surprise. "Really? Really?" he said with a smile. She ran inside, looking carefully at each dress. The shopkeeper, a kind woman named Mrs. Hayes, came over and smiled. "Well now, who's this lovely young lady?" "This is Emily," Jack said. "She's helping me at the ranch." Mrs. Hayes crouched down a little. "Helping, is she? Looks like a good helper to me. You like any of these dresses, sweetheart?" Emily nodded shyly and pointed at a soft blue one with white buttons. "That one looks like sky," she said quietly. Mrs. Hayes smiled. "Beautiful choice." When Emily went to try it on, Jack stood by the counter feeling something strange in his chest, something warm. He hadn't bought a child's dress since his son was alive. It stirred memories, but instead of pain, there was something peaceful about it this time. When Emily came out wearing the dress, she twirled shyly, her hair brushing her shoulders. Jack chuckled. "You look like sunshine," he said softly. Her face glowed. "Thank you, Daddy Jack." Mrs. Hayes gave him a curious look at the title, but said nothing. She only smiled knowingly as she wrapped the old dress in a paper bag. On the way home, Emily sang softly. A tune Jack didn't recognize, but her voice was sweet and pure. The wind carried the sound across the hills. Jack didn't say much. He just listened, his heart growing softer with each note. When they reached the ranch, Duke came running to greet them, barking happily. Emily laughed and jumped off the horse to hug him. Jack watched from a few feet away, and in that moment he realized something. He didn't just feel responsible for her anymore. He felt love, real and deep. She had become a part of his home, of his heart. Days turned into weeks. The routine felt natural. Morning chores, afternoon lessons, evening stories by the fire. Jack even started teaching her how to read from an old book he kept on the shelf. She learned quickly, tracing the letters with her finger. "You're a fast learner," he said proudly. Emily beamed. "Daddy Jack says I'm smart," he smiled. "That's because you are." But not everything stayed peaceful. One afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds returned, her car raising dust as it stopped by the fence. Jack felt his chest tighten when he saw her step out, clipboard in hand. Emily was playing near the porch, drawing in the dirt with a stick. "Afternoon, Jack," she said kindly. "Mind if we talk for a bit?" He nodded, removing his hat. "Of course." They sat on the porch while Emily played with Duke a few steps away. Mrs. Reynolds looked around, taking in the clean yard, the repaired fences, the laughter echoing from the barn. "You've done a wonderful job taking care of her," she said sincerely. "Just doing what's right," Jack replied. "I believe you," she said gently. "But we have to talk about what comes next. The law says we have to make sure she's placed properly. I can't just leave her here without paperwork." Jack's jaw tightened. "She's happy here." "You can see that," Mrs. Reynolds nodded. "I can, but happy doesn't change the rules." Emily looked up at them from where she sat, sensing the tension. "Are you mad at Daddy Jack?" she asked softly. Mrs. Reynolds smiled kindly. "No, sweetheart, not at all. We're just talking." Jack forced a smile. "Go play with Duke, Emily." She nodded and ran off, but her eyes lingered on them with worry. After a long pause, Mrs. Reynolds sighed. "There's a hearing next month. If you want to keep her here, you'll need to apply for guardianship. That means paperwork, background checks, a home visit, the works." Jack nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes," Mrs. Reynolds smiled softly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." When she left, Emily came running up to him. "What did she say? Am I leaving?" Jack crouched down and held her shoulders gently. "No, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this is your home." She threw her arms around him and whispered, "I knew you'd keep me." He hugged her tightly, his eyes wet though he tried to hide it. "You're safe, Emily, I promise." The following days were filled with both hope and worry. Jack spent evenings filling out forms with help from Mrs. Hayes, who knew her way around paperwork. Emily drew pictures beside him, saying they were for the judge. One showed her, Jack, and Duke standing in front of the ranch with the sun shining above them. Jack kept that drawing folded in his pocket wherever he went. At night, he sometimes woke up thinking about what could go wrong, the rules, the questions, the things they might find in his past. But then he would remember Emily's laughter and her trust in him, and that gave him strength. One evening, after a long day of work, he sat on the porch watching the sunset. Emily came out carrying 2 mugs of milk. "I made this for you," she said proudly. Jack smiled, taking the mug. "Well, aren't you something?" They sat side by side, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Emily leaned her head on his arm. "If the people ask me, I'll tell them I already got a daddy," she said softly. Jack's throat tightened and he nodded. "That's good, sweetheart. That's real good." The crickets began to sing and the evening grew cool. For the first time in years, Jack felt peace, not the quiet, lonely kind he used to have, but the warm, living kind that comes when you finally have someone to care for. He didn't know what the judge would decide or how hard the road ahead would be. But one thing he knew for certain, he would never let Emily go back to feeling alone. Not while he still had breath in his body. That night, as Emily drifted to sleep holding her teddy bear, Jack whispered from the doorway, "You're home now, little cowgirl. No one's taken that away." The stars shimmered softly over the ranch, and the sound of the wind through the grass carried a promise of a new family born not by blood, but by kindness and love. The days leading up to the hearing passed faster than Jack expected. The ranch stayed full of life, with Emily laughing and talking to the animals as if they were her friends. She named each chicken, made little crowns of hay for the horses, and drew pictures of Duke with big floppy ears. Every time Jack watched her, he felt more certain that he was doing the right thing. She belonged there. The ranch had found its missing sound, a child's laughter. But as the date of the hearing drew closer, Jack grew nervous. He wasn't used to courts or officials. He knew how to mend fences and handle cattle, but when it came to papers and judges, he felt out of place. Mrs. Hayes helped him go through each document again and again, making sure everything was signed right. Emily helped too. sitting on his lap as he filled out the forms asking what each line meant. "What does guardian mean?" she asked one evening, her finger tracing the word on the page. Jack smiled softly. "It means someone who takes care of you. Someone who makes sure you're safe always." Her eyes brightened. "Then you're already my guardian." Jack chuckled, trying to hide the emotion in his throat. "Guess I am, huh?" The morning of the hearing came cold and gray. Emily wore the blue dress Jack had bought her, with her hair tied neatly in two small braids. She clutched her teddy bear in one hand and Jack's big hand in the other as they entered the small-town courthouse. Jack wore his cleanest shirt and hat, though he still felt awkward among the people in suits and ties. Inside, the courtroom was quiet. The judge, a kind-faced woman named Judge Parker, smiled gently at Emily before turning to Jack. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I understand you've been caring for young Emily here for several weeks?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said respectfully. "Since the night I found her by the road," the judge nodded. "And you understand what this guardianship means?" Jack took a deep breath. "Yes, ma'am. It means she'll have a home, my home, and I'll take care of her as long as I live." The judge smiled slightly. "That's a fine answer, Mr. Turner." Mrs. Reynolds, the social worker, stood and spoke kindly about how well Emily had adjusted, how she had found comfort and care on the ranch. She showed photos of Emily feeding the horses and helping Jack fix the fence. The judge studied them with a thoughtful look. Then she turned to Emily. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "do you like living on the ranch?" Emily looked up, her small voice clear but gentle. "Yes, ma'am. It's my home now. And do you like living with Mr. Turner?" Emily smiled, holding her teddy bear tight. "He's my daddy, Jack. He makes pancakes and he doesn't yell. He lets me help with the horses. And he said I can stay." The courtroom was silent for a moment, touched by her words. Even the clerk looked down, hiding a small smile. Judge Parker adjusted her glasses and said kindly, "Thank you, Emily." After a short pause, the judge looked at Jack again. "Mr. Turner," she said slowly, "it's clear to me that this child has found love and safety with you. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up and never leave. I see no reason to separate what's already whole." Jack blinked, hardly believing her words. "Does that mean—" The judge nodded with a smile. "It means as of today you are officially her legal guardian." "Congratulations, Mr. Turner." Emily gasped and threw her arms around Jack's neck before he could even respond. "I told you, Daddy Jack," she said, laughing through tears. "We get to stay." Jack hugged her tight, unable to speak for a long moment. His heart felt fuller than it had in years. The judge smiled at them both and said softly, "Take care of each other. That's all that matters." Outside, the sky had turned bright again. The gray clouds drifted away, leaving sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps. Mrs. Reynolds shook Jack's hand. "You did good, Jack," she said warmly. "She's lucky to have you." Jack looked down at Emily, who was skipping ahead with Duke's leash in her hand even though Duke wasn't there. She had just imagined him beside her. "I think I'm the lucky one," he said quietly. When they reached home that evening, the ranch looked more beautiful than ever. The horses ran along the fence as if they knew something special had happened. Emily jumped off the horse and ran straight into the yard, shouting, "We did it, Duke! We get to stay!" Duke barked and ran circles around her, his tail wagging wildly. Jack laughed, watching the two of them chase each other in the golden light. It was a picture of peace he never thought he'd see again. That night, Emily wanted to celebrate. She insisted on setting the table herself. She placed 2 plates, 2 glasses, and even folded the napkins. Jack cooked her favorite, pancakes with honey, even though it was dinner time. When they sat down to eat, Emily raised her glass of milk. "To our ranch," she said proudly, "and to Daddy Jack." Jack raised his cup of coffee with a grin. "To us, little cowgirl." They clinked glasses and laughed. After dinner, Emily sat by the window watching the stars. "Do you think my real daddy can see me?" she asked softly. Jack walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think he can," he said. "And I think he's proud." She looked up at him. "Are you proud too?" He smiled, his eyes gentle. "More than you'll ever know." She hugged him tight and whispered, "I love you, Daddy Jack." Jack swallowed hard, feeling tears threaten to rise. He hadn't heard those words in so long. "I love you too, Emily," he said quietly. "More than the sky and all the stars in it." As the night deepened, the ranch grew quiet. The wind rustled through the grass and the horses settled in the barn. Emily fell asleep on the couch, her teddy bear in her arms. Jack carried her to her little room, the one he'd fixed up with clean curtains, a proper bed, and a painting of a horse she liked. He tucked her in, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. For a long time, he stood there watching her sleep. The house, once filled with silence and dust, now had warmth again. It had laughter, small footsteps, and the soft hum of a child's dreams. He turned off the light and walked to the porch. The moon was high above the fields, painting everything in silver. Duke sat beside him, wagging his tail lazily. Jack looked out at the horizon and thought about how strange life could be, how a lonely cowboy could find family again by chance, and how a lost child could find home in the unlikeliest place. He smiled to himself and said softly, "We did it, Sarah. The house isn't empty anymore." The wind blew gently through the grass, almost like a whisper of approval. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep and mumbled, "Good night, Daddy Jack." Jack smiled and whispered back from the porch, "Good night, sweetheart." The ranch was quiet once more, but this time it was not the quiet of loneliness. It was the peaceful quiet of love, safety, and a home finally complete. And so, the cowboy who had lost everything and the little girl who had been thrown away by the world built something new together. Something stronger than sadness, something gentler than fear. They built family. From that day on, whenever people in town saw Jack Turner ride into Emporium with a little girl by his side, they smiled and said, "There goes Daddy Jack and his cowgirl." And no one ever doubted that they truly belonged to each other.